Stop! Do not start sowing your seeds in January or February. Or at least, don't sow your seeds until you've watched this, because here are my 10 things that I think you need to know before you do start sowing your seeds in January or February. Hey everyone, how's it going? And welcome back. Yep, you heard me right. Do not start into sowing all of your seeds just yet. Now, I am well aware that this might seem like a really hypocritical video, but bear with me. This is not me having a go or knocking channels that make monthly seed sowing videos that include the months of January or February, because let's face it, I'm one of them. But just be really wary of being told this is the way, because sowing loads of seeds in January is not actually the norm. It's something that can be done, but aside from a few specific plants, it's not something that has to be done. So before you start sieving that compost or ripping up all those seed packets, especially if you're new to sowing and growing, here's what I think you really need to know and what you should do. Okay, so first off, let's talk equipment. And this is probably going to be one of the biggest considerations if you're wanting to sow at this time of year. You only have to look outside at the minute to see that if weed seedlings aren't growing, then realistically not much else is going to. So that means you're going to need equipment to provide the light and the heat that seeds need to germinate and so that they can thrive. Now, when it comes to sowing under cover, that's going to be a minimum of either a cold frame, a greenhouse, or a polytunnel. For seeds that really need a little bit of extra heat, that's going to be a heated propagator. Then, once they germinate, they're going to need light. So now you're going to need to be talking about buying growing lights. Now, if you're the kind of person that loves an excuse to buy some gear, I do. I love it. I love buying gardening equipment and camera equipment. Then go for it. I'm not going to judge. But if you don't want to have to buy grow lights, and if you just want to grow plants and you're not particularly experienced, it's really easy to get sucked into the social media thing of you need to buy this to be successful. But just remember that all of those things, all of that equipment is to overcome the fact that you're sowing seeds so early. So quite often, all you need to do is wait until the conditions improve, and you would be amazed at quite how quickly plants make up lost ground. The dreaded leggy seedlings. It's happened to all of us. It certainly has happened to me, and the technical term for this is etiolation. It happens when plants grow and stretch in an attempt to get to the light that they need, but if light levels are too low, seedlings are going to stretch too far, and once a seedling has grown too leggy, well, unfortunately, you can't make it contract no matter how much you would like it to. Now, for some plants, that's not an issue, and ultimately they're going to grow on fine. But for others, it can lead them to becoming really weak, unproductive plants, or at worst, just not making it and dying off. And that brings us on to the next point, waste. And I'm not just talking about wasting seeds, I'm talking about something way more precious, which is your time. The failure rate of seed germination and seedlings when they're sown at this time of year deep in the winter is, as you'd expect, much higher than when they're sown at their optimum time. So that means you can easily end up wasting a whole load of time and a whole load of your precious seed stores just trying to sow and grow and tend them. Now, if you're desperate to sow some seeds, choose ones that really do need to be sown early. Or sow just a tiny pinch of each thing, knowing that you can always sow some more later. Okay, so on to point number 4, space. So you get a load of seedlings going in January, and then a load more in February and in March, but you can't actually get them planted out into the garden, maybe until April or even May. That is a lot of little plants. So you need to make sure that you have space for all of them, because the amount of space you're going to need is going to rapidly increase as they grow into larger plants. You can fit hundreds of tiny seedlings into a seed tray, but hundreds of 3-inch pots, well, that is a whole different ballgame, trust me. I've got a polytunnel and a conservatory, so I've got loads of room, but that's not the case for everyone. Plus, if your plants need a grow light, then that grow light is only going to be capable of supporting a certain number of plants. So really look and honestly assess how much usable space you have in advance. Overwhelm. Now, this is something that's actually very personal to me, and it's because it's something that I do tend to suffer with, because I often throw myself 110% into something and turn it into a mission. Getting seeds to germinate at this time of year is actually only the very start of the real work, and it really kicks in when looking after seedlings. Seedlings are a little bit like children or pets. They require a lot of care, a lot of attention and love to grow up healthily. And the workload increases beyond just having to water them when you're also having to create a suitable growing environment, because you're working against what's actually happening at this time of year. So take care not to overload yourself with hundreds of seedlings, all needing supplementary light, supplementary heat, watering and care, when actually, if you just sowed them a little bit later in the spring, they'd romp away happily by themselves without you having to do anything. Next up, let's talk about early cropping. Early crops are great. You even get that little bit of the old bragging rights when you're the first person with a ripe tomato, and that's great. But equally, just remember that early crops don't necessarily equate to a longer cropping season. Like for instance, tomatoes, they're not cut and come again salads. They're only going to produce a certain amount of fruit. So unless you're specifically wanting an early harvest, if you sow all of your seeds now, there is a risk that you could end up short later in the season, while everybody else is still enjoying theirs. And that's definitely no fun. So ask yourself, do I specifically need a really early crop? Or do I need to grow something in particular? If not, then maybe hold off for a while, because ultimately it's not a race. Right, those are the main problems that I can see you running into. But here are a couple of other practicalities that you should definitely bear in mind. And first of all, it's last frost date. You always hear me saying in my videos, bear in mind your own local growing conditions and last frost date. And that's because for a lot of tender plants that you'll have raised, they're going to get damaged or even killed off by frost. But the flip side of that is that you'll also have small plants getting larger and really needing to get out of their pots and into open soil. So you can see where the problems start. Either you risk putting your plants out earlier than you really should, which is dangerous, or the quantities of plants you have in pots under cover are going to keep increasing. But fear not, there is a really simple rule of thumb. Aside from things that really need to be sown particularly early, things like chilies or aubergines, 8 weeks is always a good figure to keep in mind. Work out what your last frost date is and then subtract 8 weeks. And that's going to work really nicely as a good first sowing date for lots of things. And to work that out, just Google last frost date map and there are some great websites that are going to come up, and it'll make it really easy to work out your own. Next up, compost nutrition levels, because just like a battery, the compost that you sow your seeds into and pot your baby plants into only has a certain amount of nutrition, and as your plants grow larger, their nutrition requirements grow too. Now, if you've grown plants from seed before, I'm sure you've had times when the plants start to look a little bit pale, a little bit weak, a little bit yellow. That's because most likely they've exhausted the compost that they're in. So transpose that onto seeds sown very early and you can see the potential pitfall. If you're not careful, you can end up with a whole load of baby plants that are needing more oomph from the compost they're in, but the weather outside isn't good enough for planting them out. So you're either going to need to drag it out for a bit longer with your plants looking a little bit sickly, or end up potting them on again. And neither of those options are really ideal. And of course, there's potting on. Well, that's number 9 on my list of things to think about. The longer you have your plants in little pots before you get them into the soil, the bigger they're going to get. And the bigger they're going to get, the more they're going to need to be potted on. Any extra potting on that you need to do means you're going to need even more compost. You're going to need more pots. It's more work and of course, more time. Last up, and I think this is the most important point of all, there isn't just one way to sow and grow seeds. If you look at the vast majority of seeds, they can quite happily be sown direct out into the soil, providing you pick an appropriate time weather-wise, or in an unheated polytunnel once the weather warms up a little bit. Now, sowing early, using propagators, using grow lights and all of that, that's extra effort, extra equipment and money. So if you don't feel like doing all that, just remember you don't have to. It's not a race. And actually, if you think you're going to find it difficult to bring on seedlings at this time of year, don't set yourself up for failure. Just chill out for a while and enjoy it all in a month or two. Right, so now that we've waded through all of the doom and gloom, what do I think you should do? Well, it's easy. One word: edit. You don't have to sow everything in 1 month, so don't. Just don't. Stop it. There are some seeds that really do need to get started early. Things like chilies, aubergines and peppers, they all need a long growing season in order for them to crop well. And in a cool temperate climate like here in Ireland, the plants just can't really get all of their growing done in time if they're started in March and April. They do need to be started mega early. So maybe just sow them and then lavish all of your care and attention on them. You'll have less quantity of seedlings to keep warm, well lit, and it's going to be so much more manageable, and as a result, so much more fun. A bit like the compost that your seeds get sown in, you only have so much energy, so prioritize your workload. Rather than sowing all of your seeds, take some time to organize them really nicely so that you keep them better, they're easier to find, and they last longer. Have some fun reading some books or looking online and having to think about what you really like to grow. Or use the time to plan what you're going to sow and when. If you're watching a monthly seed sowing video, use it as a source of happy inspiration and pick what really interests you, rather than seeing it as a must sow now, high pressure kind of list. Or even just use the time to get other practical jobs accomplished in your garden. Things like clearing or landscaping, that's what I do. And if you're desperate to sow a few things, just remember, just sow a little of a few things and plan to sow more over the coming months. Doing that not only increases your chances of success, but it can also stretch out your cropping period. Oh, it's getting cold and the light is going down, but before I go, a few final words of encouragement from me. Plants actually catch up surprisingly well, and you would be amazed at how a plant that was sown in April can look just as good once it reaches maturity as a super early sown plant that needed loads of coaxing over the months of winter and early spring. So absolutely sow things really early if you want to, for the fun of it, but just remember the considerations that we've talked about today before you start putting seed to compost. Now, armed with all of this knowledge, go forth and watch my January seed sowing videos, because I've got really good detailed recommendations, not only for some great edibles to grow, but also some great flowers. And until next time, see you later.